Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. My name is Kyle Buller. I will be your host today. If this is your first time listening, thanks for joining us. And if you're a seasoned listener here over at Psychedelics Today, thank you for your support and tuning in. So today on the show, I am joined by Dr. Malin Uthaug. Congratulations, Malin, on your successful defense of your dissertation and earning that title doctor. So congrats. It's been really exciting to watch Malin grow over the past few years. We originally connected with her, I think, in the beginning of our development here at Psychedelics Today. And it's just been really fun watching her contribute to the psychedelic field and really grow as a person. So yeah, huge congratulations, Malin, doing awesome work. If you're not familiar with Malin's work, you can definitely go back into our archive. We had an episode with Malin in the past. She's written some articles for us as well, covering 5-MeO, conservation of the Bufo alvarius toad. And we also did a webinar with her and Rafael Encelado on 5-MeO-DMT. You can find that one on YouTube. It should be up on our site as well. We'll probably get it up there. So yeah, in this episode, we get to chat about Malin's dissertation and some of the work that she's been up to and just getting some updates on what she's been up to. So her dissertation is called The Exploration of Naturalistically Used Ayahuasca and 5-MeO-DMT, an assessment of their respective subacute and long-term effects on mental health-related variables. So in this episode, we just chat about her work, some of the updates, and then we get into all sorts of topics revolving around her research, talking about the different settings of 5-MeO-DMT, reactivation, trauma, talk about the ritualistic aspect of ayahuasca and kind of speculate maybe some sort of clinical potential with 5-MeO-DMT. So we really cover a lot of her research with ayahuasca and 5-MeO-DMT. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. It was really enlightening and just always fun to explore these topics. So I'm going to leave it at that and keep this intro a little bit on the shorter end. Again, if you want to learn more about Malin's work, you can go back and check out some of our previous episodes with her or check out some of the blogs that she has contributed to Psychedelics Today on psychedelicstoday.com/blog. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. And congrats again, Malin, for your work and your successful defense on your dissertation. If you want to support the show, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcast. If you're feeling called to it, we'd be grateful if you left a review. That helps us out tremendously. And a really awesome way to support the show is just share anything. Share a podcast on some of your social platforms, repost a picture on Instagram from one of our accounts, and it just really helps to spread the word. So that's probably one of the best ways to help support us during these times, just help get the message out there and let people know that we're out here doing this type of work. If you're feeling called to it, you can also support us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/psychedelicstoday. And yeah, we really appreciate any support. It's always amazing looking back at, what Joe and I have been up to for the past 4 years and just seeing how this project has grown. So thank you for everybody that's been with us on this journey and on this ride. It really means a lot to us. So yeah, just thank you. In other news as well, we have some seats left to our Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists course coming up in September. The classes start on September 17th. That's a Thursday. And we have 2 groups. One's at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And then the next group is 7 p.m. Eastern time. If you want to learn more about that, you can go on over to psychedeliceducationcenter.com and find the course Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists, and you can learn a whole bunch over there. It's a hybrid course, so a lot of online videos, materials that's housed on our education platform. So you can go through the material, and then we will meet on Zoom 8 times. So it's an 8-week course, and we dedicate an hour and a half to those classroom calls just to really explore the content, Q&A, and live discussion. So it's just a really great time to spend together with everybody, learn from each other, and just to really dig into all the little nuances in the field of psychedelics. So if you want to join us, psychedeliceducationcenter.com, and go on over to Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists. And we also have approval for the CE credits as well, which is really exciting. So you can learn more about the CE credits on that page. So if you have any questions, just go on over there, check that out. We are co-sponsored by the Spiritual Competency Resource Center, hosted by Dr. David Lukoff. And yeah, so really excited to be able to offer CE credits for folks. I know that's something that's been in the works for a while, and excited to be able to offer that. So I will leave it at that, and I hope everybody enjoys this episode with Dr. Malin Uthaug, and we will catch you on the other side.
This episode is brought to you by Deep Sky Coffee, a veteran-owned coffee company. For every coffee purchase, they donate to psychedelic research for breakthrough PTSD treatments. Deep Sky Coffee is an ambassador to the Heroic Hearts Project, who we have featured on the show twice. The founder is a 20-year Air Force veteran who witnessed firsthand the devastation of PTSD and TBI within the special operations community. For coffee blends, Deep Sky Coffee donates to dark sky preservation and light pollution awareness. Very important for us in the psychedelic world. The coffee tastes awesome. I had some far before we had any kind of business arrangement with Deep Sky, and it is very good. I would drink the Ethiopian every day if I could. And that was definitely, Ethiopia is my favorite of their single origin blends. The others were also great. They also have cold brew and decaf options. Their roaster is a 5-time Golden Bean Medal winner, a national level award. Your coffee arrives days after it was roasted. And the company also offers coffee subscriptions and wholesale partnerships for businesses. So check them out, deepskycoffee.com, and you can learn more there. If you want to support the show, please support them. And at the very least, maybe send one out as a gift. Thank you all for listening. On with the show.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to Psychedelics Today. Today, we are back with Dr. Malin Uthaug. Congratulations on your recent defense and finishing up your doctorate.
Thank you so much, Kyle. It's a pleasure to be back. It's kind of funny. I think we spoke 2017 when I had first started my PhD. So now we're
now you're done, coming full circle.
Yeah. Definitely. Exciting.
And we did check in when we did that webinar, the 5-MeO webinar with Raf and you and Joe.
Yeah.
You're just at the tail end. Cool. Well, you want to give folks a little bit of update of what you've been up to in the past few years since you were last on?
Yeah. So last time we spoke, then I kind of talked generally about how I started investigating the effects of ayahuasca and 5-MeO-DMT. And back then I had just basically started, but throughout the years, I've now traveled around in South America, in Colombia specifically, and many locations in Europe. I spent a lot of my time in Prague and in the Czech Republic. I was based there because Prague is sort of like this 5-MeO-DMT hub in a way. So
it's not illegal, right? So people are able to kind of do it, or is it just in a gray area where they never really made any laws around it?
It seems like it's a little bit of a gray area at the moment. It was not really illegal or illegal. So they kind of never made a decision about it, if it makes sense. So therefore, many 5-MeO-DMT facilitators, I think, took advantage of that and started coming to Prague. And there were all these toad ceremonies. There were also synthetic 5-MeO use. And this just, was a great place to be and do naturalistic observational research, which has kind of been the approach that I've taken with my PhD studies. And that's been super helpful. I mean, there are, of course, limitations that we don't really control the setting, the
Right.
dosing, it was all about like the facilitators, and we just came in to observe. But despite those limitations, I think we managed to gather a lot of important data that could inform future studies or even clinical trials. So that was basically my job, trying to lay this stronger foundation of 5-MeO research, because there wasn't much about it. Very, very little.
Only a handful of researchers, you, Raf, Dr. Alan Davis, and a few others, right?
Yeah.
It's very sparse.
Yeah, and I think it started off with like Alan's survey study. That was a great start, like a great way to kick it off. And it's a very easy study to cite and find information on. And then what we did in Prague with my naturalistic research was kind of just like prospective research. So you follow people over time, whereas Alan would ask people about their most memorable 5-MeO-DMT experience.
Right.
So I think that was it was a nice combination.
What were some of the things that really stuck out for you in regards to like naturalistic use? Like, things that you might have observed that might have seemed beneficial or not so beneficial versus like comparing that to potential clinical use, and like how could we incorporate some of those elements that you might have seen that were beneficial that aren't necessarily so clinical at times? And I wonder if you could speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, like one of the things that I started reflecting on very much now at the end of the PhD is like the importance of context, and also like the importance of community and a sense of safety. So like the 5-MeO-DMT underground settings, I would say many are a little bit kind of dangerous in a way. Whereas, for example, we see with my ayahuasca research, it's kind of like in this controlled setting, which I think people can feel more secure in, rather than just being met with this facilitator. You see him once and then he leaves, and then you leave the premise where the session took place. So what are you left with? So I think the importance of community is important to address. And this also makes me think about what we touched upon right before we started, like holotropic breathwork. They have safety container there, part of their protocol. So I think that's something to look into.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the components of breathwork for us is group process.
Yeah.
And so just thinking about that group container, and I mean, just even thinking about the community that I'm part of in Vermont, it feels like a community. We still have like online gatherings during this downtime since we can't really meet in person. And it feels really sacred at times of just coming together, knowing everybody's stories, and feeling like we're kind of on this together, and we keep coming back to each other. And that's the one thing that really, I guess, drew me into doing breath work versus opposed to like some of my psychedelic experiences in my early years, where it was mostly me or just one friend. And then it was great, but not having a cohesive community to come back to and almost kind of grow together as well. And you see the change and supporting people while they go through these really powerful experiences. And I think that's a huge component. And I sometimes wonder how we could create that within kind of like the clinical setting versus staying so individualized and just thinking about treatment and saying, okay, well, we just completed our treatment. Now go off and do your own thing and find your community or something like that, right?
Yeah. Like one thing that I think is important, for example, if you're looking at psychedelic assisted therapy, is to definitely have this like preparation sessions before, where you are developing this therapeutic alliance with the client, and you kind of prepare them a little bit for like, this is what we're going to do. This is what you might expect, and make them relax a little bit and build up that sense of safety, so that the session itself can be much more relaxed and easier, and you don't have that many challenging experiences. And from what I remember on top of my head right now, there was a study that came out. What's his last name? Cepeda? I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, but it's Nathan Johns Hopkins.
Oh, yep.
Yeah.
I forget how to pronounce his last name too.
Yeah, that's okay. So sorry, Nathan, if I said it incorrectly. So I think they found that like there are certain things in the setting that kind of like predict whether people would have a challenging experience or like more, let's say, intense mystical experience. I don't know if I think they mentioned music and doing it and like with the guide, something like this. But now I'm just taking it off of my head here. But I think that's a very interesting study to look at specifically then if you want to prepare something for 5-MeO-DMT in the future in a clinical setting. Yeah.
That's interesting. I don't think I've heard too much about music being incorporated. Did you see any of that in like what you were observing when you were doing your research of facilitators incorporating music into these ceremonies, or is it they're not doing that?
So I think, well, one facilitator in particular, he would use this rattle and like sing. And so that was kind of like the musical component. I remember from one study in Prague, where the participants would use synthetic 5-MeO-DMT. And this was in like a rented yoga studio. And I think there was some noise or whatever outside, and that the facilitator wanted to kind of like block this out. So like during the acute experience, the facilitator played a song. I don't remember which one it was right now, but it's in my thesis. I can find it afterwards. So yeah, that was used, but I don't think it was particularly to enhance the mystical experience, but more to just like, okay, create this like bubble in a way.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess that would make sense. It being such a powerful substance and so short acting, you probably don't need the music to create that container at times, I'm assuming, versus something that's a little bit more prolonged where it helps to create that container. I'm guessing, I don't know, people probably wouldn't even be aware music might be even playing in some of those non-dual states.
Definitely. Well, I think that would also depend largely on dosing, I also read it recently, and The Toad and the Jaguar by Ralph Metzner, and he talks about like the effective dose and dissociative doses. I wonder if I can find it real quick here. I think he says that beyond 15 milligrams, that's kind of like when you enter dissociative territory. So yeah, let me see. Yeah, I think above 15.
So this was an interesting question somebody posed to us during our class. And since you just were talking about dissociative states, they asked, what's the difference in a psychedelic state where you're dissociated, like, you're talking about this dissociation with 5, versus ego death, maybe experience unity, the Godhead experience? Like, how do you tell the difference between that? And I wonder what Metzner is describing as dissociative as well. And I thought that was a really interesting question. I was like, I don't think I've ever really thought about that, of thinking about like the dissociation versus just being in a transpersonal realm. My answer was more along the lines of you having no control and maybe completely acting out, and you're not really in the experience, but just really kind of detached from the experience. And maybe you are in another world, but you have no control over your body, what you're doing, and, when things kind of maybe go wrong. But I don't know.
Yeah, no, I really like the question, and I haven't really thought about it myself, actually. But if I could speculate, then I think that ego dissolution is kind of like, if you're going to rate that on a questionnaire afterwards, a part of you would need to be present in a way. So dissociation to me would mean that you're completely switched off. Whereas ego dissolution perhaps is just like, it's the sense of a compromised self per definition. So you need to sense it in order to kind of have that experience. But of course, perhaps people's definition of ego dissolution could be different. Perhaps they think it is actually just completely switching off,
Right.
I don't know. But I looked up here now in Metzner's book, he says that psychological dissociation is basically unconsciousness of one's own bodily postures and gestures, vocalizations and verbalizations, as well as more or less total disconnect of awareness of one's surroundings. So
yeah, and I guess that's what I was kind of suggesting as well, just being so disconnected from that and not being able to really know what you're doing, and just thinking about some of those like worst case scenarios that I've heard that have happened in ceremonies, and it's like that sounds like somebody was dissociated versus just having a really powerful unity, ego dissolving experience and hanging out in those transpersonal realms.
Yeah.
But it was the first time, I don't know, I've heard somebody pose that question. So you bringing up that, just the dissociative part, I'm like, I wonder what you think about this as well.
No, it's true. It's true. And I think that's another thing I saw in the underground. Like there was so much focus on like getting to that ego dissolution state. And maybe many people mistook a dissociative state for that ego dissolution. And
right.
That can create more problems long term, I think, if you're kind of pushed into a dissociative state and you think that, okay, now everything's fixed, but then problems would come perhaps even stronger than they were before because now you have dissociation on top of it.
Right. And I guess this might be a good transition for your one paper that you co-authored with Rafael Lancelotti and I believe Alan Davis and a few others, Annie Ortiz, about reactivation.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me wonder, it sounds like this occurs more often when people are vaporizing 5-MeO.
Yeah.
And I wonder about the dosing with that, because I think I read somewhere in your article that there's repeated dosing usually with smoked 5-MeO. And I wonder, are people entering into more of these dissociative states, I guess, with having these repeated doses versus just getting to maybe to that threshold dose where you feel some sort of ego dissolution versus I'm kind of feeling it, and then boom, get another dose, and now you're just completely blown out.
Yeah. It could be many things going on here, and this was just the first study that we did now on reactivations to kind of figure out, okay, what is going on. And like I said, it's too early to say. My speculation is that because vaporization is such a fast way to administer 5-MeO-DMT, it could kind of bring about this shock to the person, or I would say the nervous system in a way. And similar to what Peter Levine talks about, anything that happens too soon, too fast, too much is a recipe for trauma. Mm-hmm. And perhaps in a way, in some instances with vaporization, you could have this, too much too soon effect on the nervous system, which could then, when we see in the study, people usually have reactivations when they're relaxed, so maybe then the nervous system gets to the point where okay, now I can finish what I started and have this resolution. But we don't see that so much with intramuscular, and I think the reason for that is because the onset is so much slower. People can then relax into the experience. There is more time to complete trauma resolution if you're looking to use this on PTSD, for example. So it's not a 15-minute in and out, but it's a 40-minute kind of okay, slowly you go into it, you're there, and then you ease out of it. And that can be a much smoother way to go about it.
Right. So I guess let's backtrack a little bit. I just threw out that term reactivation. And for those that might be listening that don't know what we're talking about, can you define that and really what this paper and this research was trying to explore here?
Yeah, sure. Let me just find it here and my thesis. because it's basically just like the re-experiencing of parts of the 5-MeO-DMT experience. And some people might say or like report that they're experiencing this like white light, or they're going into this like 5-MeO-DMT experience where they feel a sense of like unity and whatever else are typical things that people report for 5-MeO-DMT in the actual session that they have. But basically they seem to happen sometime after as well. And like I mentioned before, we're still trying to figure out what this is all about. But we also tried to compare it with, for example, flashbacks, LSD flashbacks. So what we see is that there is indeed a difference here. So LSD flashbacks are kind of occurring much longer, like up to years, whereas reactivations can happen up to like 1 or 2 weeks. And LSD flashbacks are more of negative valence. Is that a way you can say it? And actually what Alan found is that people that have reactivations with 5-MeO-DMT, 93% or 96% of them, they actually report it as being a positive experience or a neutral experience, whereas you have those 3-4% that don't really have a great experience at all.
When I read that number, I was actually really surprised, and it made me think about the difference between this reactivation with 5-MeO versus what I guess we would call HPPD with the LSD flashbacks. And I wonder what the difference there is. Like, I mean, obviously you just kind of pointed out, it seems like some of the LSD flashbacks or HPPD could be extended to weeks, to months, to possibly even years. And that might be really distressing over time.
Yeah.
Versus maybe getting kind of quick little, I guess you would say, these reactivations that only lasts about like a week to 2 weeks. Maybe it's kind of like a nice little reminder, like, oh, whoa, okay. Yeah, so it's interesting to, I guess, look at those two and just see kind of what's going on there.
Definitely. And another thing that I started thinking about is like, okay, perhaps it could also be something that people expect might happen, because not only have they read about things online about what to expect when you're going to have your 5-MeO-DMT experience, but also perhaps the facilitator would also be like, yep, you're likely to have a reactivation and it's going to be this and this, and then they would have it. So maybe there's some placebo effect as well going on. I don't know, but we just need to continue researching it. Yeah.
What are some of your like hypotheses or speculations about what's going on here?
I think I'm leaning a little bit onto what Peter Levine talks about, like too much, too soon, too fast is like a recipe for trauma. So I think that the nervous system is just looking for a way to release what it started. So that's kind of where I'm at. But of course, I don't know. And I might also just be a little bit biased thinking it in those lines. But we'll see what we find in research. It could be interesting to follow up.
Well, it's a really interesting thing to explore, because HPPD is kind of like this weird, mysterious diagnosis. Like, it is diagnosable, right? But we had a writer that was trying to explore this, and I know HPPD is a little bit different than the reactivation. But it was just really interesting. I think she kept hitting some sort of roadblock with trying to gather information, or people not really wanting to talk about it. But when I did talk to Dr. Torsten Passy, we were chatting about this as well. And his speculation was that it was some sort of trauma response, especially with, like, say, LSD, like something came up, some sort of trauma came up in the body, and then maybe not being able to process it because you might be in a recreational setting, or you don't have that container to really process. And whenever I come back to like Stan Groff's like definition of, psychedelics, non-specific amplifiers of mental or psychic processes. So having things come to the surface, not being able to really process it fully, and then it's still kind of cycling. It's still in the nervous system. It's still in the psyche. And so it's interesting. I mean, I guess I'm a little biased coming from the somatic background as well, and thinking about, working through some of that stuff. But I also wonder too about the shamanic context. And I wonder if you came across anything. I know you did some ayahuasca research. I wonder if you came across anybody talking about like feeling those experiences coming back, like having any sort of reactivation symptoms with ayahuasca? Because I know after my ceremony, like I definitely had some situations come up throughout the weeks. I'm like, oh, there it is. Oh, or just having like things that could reactivate. I mean, I talked on a podcast recently about taking CBD post Aya ceremony and being catapulted back into the sessions.
Really?
And doing kind of a lot of trauma processing. And I thought that was like really interesting, going, what the hell's going on here? Because CBD it's not very psychoactive. But coming from like the somatic background, thinking about relaxation can be really triggering for people. So Babette Rothschild's research shows that yoga, for example, can be really re-traumatizing for people that are suffering for PTSD. And just thinking about that relaxation. So maybe the CBD was kind of put me in this little bit of a relaxed state. And then all that processes started to unfold again. Or maybe is it something shamanic? Are the plants still with you? Is the spirit still with you communicating?
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's super, super interesting, these things. And one of the things that came up for me now when we're talking is like state-dependent memory. And also, for example, people that struggle with PTSD, they're kind of in this like hyper-arousal state. And the same we see with anxiety. And it can be very like difficult for them to kind of like be like brought down, their window of tolerance is very different from a normal person, I'm saying normal, but I think it's all just like, we're all just on like a spectrum of normality anyway. But I think perhaps that those who have PTSD, when they're relaxed, or when you bring them down, that can be incredibly scary for them, because their nervous system is already like so much on like guard. So taking them out of that comfort zone or like comfort zone in a way can have like induce like a difficulties for them. But I'm also not too well read up on this. I don't know where I was going with this.
No worries. So from your research, did you find people that had reactivation? Usually it was in like a 1 to 2 week window. Did anybody report anything beyond that? Like say they had like a reactivation months later, or I don't know if you were trying to find data for that in your research questions, but...
So what we did was basically doing like a retrospective survey where we basically asked them, what did you take? Did you use intramuscular or vaporization? Did you have a reactivation? Yes or no? When did it happen? And stuff like this. What I'm planning on is to make like a prospective survey where you can follow people over time when they're using 5-MeO-DMT through different routes of administration. And then you can kind of get a feel for, okay, if you ask them around 7 days, 14 days later, 1 month, and you follow them over the course of a year, we might be able to answer more questions around reactivations.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What percentage do you see with IM use in this community? Is it pretty prevalent, or is vaporization like the go-to route of administration for most facilitators?
Yeah, I see the majority are using vaporization, and I think that just has to do with the whole pamphlet that came out by Albert Most outlining how to use the toad secretion to, administer 5-MeO-DMT. And then that just kind of became popularized by facilitators that were traveling around. And this was an easy way to give it to a lot of people. And I think that's largely why we see so many people using it through vaporization,
Yeah. How many people, I don't know if you remember off the top of your head, were using IM for 5-MeO?
From our study, so it was a very, very small sample size. We just got 27 respondents, and I think it was 14 that had intramuscular injection, and the rest of the respondents were 13. So, I think IM is fairly rare when you compare it to vaporization, but it still happens, and there are other administrations that are also used, which we don't hear that often about. So you have the snuff, and I also heard about rectal administration, which I'm just like, wow, I would not want to do that.
There are people that want to do that. It sounds like it's a much stronger absorption.
But I think with IM, you have so much more control over the dose compared with vaporization, because then everybody has different, inhalation techniques. And even though you load the pipe with 5 milligrams and the person inhales it, he or she might just get 3. So you can never really control for how much is stuck in the pipe, how much went off in the air, and how much they have inside of them.
And with this research, were you also collecting data on people using synthetic versus toad secretion?
For this particular survey, we focused specifically on synthetic 5-MeO-DMT. The reason for that has been that we kind of, me and Raphael, wanted to steer away from the toad secretion data collection in a way. It just didn't really align with our values. And we both know that synthetic 5-MeO-DMT is going to be what is going to be legalized anyway, because the toad secretion is so complex. It contains so many different alkaloids. And even though the majority of those are 5-MeO-DMT, it's just, it's not going to be easily legalized, because ethics, FDA would need safety controls.
Right. Yeah. And, something that you've pointed out and have written a few articles about for us that we've published is the conservation effort as well for toads, I'm assuming as well.
Yeah, definitely. That's a whole other thing as well, but it's very important. And it was something, I guess, I didn't think much about also when I started. And if I could go back, I probably wouldn't have done the study on toad secretion. But back then it was okay, this is what people are doing. It's a good way to get information. But overall, I think, maybe not. I think it was a good experience to have to realize the importance of ethical and ecological considerations of toad secretion use. So we're all learning.
Totally. And you and Raphael put together a T-shirt. And what's the saying there? Save a toad, or use a scientist, save a toad. What's their slang? Or the phrase
save
there?
a toad, exploit a chemist.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, we created that one. It's a year ago now. When I was living in Crete, we had this idea right before breaking convention. Wow, wouldn't it be cool if we could raise awareness about this? So we had my friend draw this scientist being squeezed, put it on a sticker and a T-shirt, and we tried to spread the word.
If anybody's listening and wants to get a T-shirt or a tote bag or a sticker, I think we have stickers up there. You go to our shop at psychedelictodayshop.com. They are up there, so definitely check that out. Yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover within your reactivation research that we might have not touched on? That seems important to highlight.
I think we covered most of it. Another thing that came to mind is that we see more physical relief occurring from intramuscular injection use compared to vaporization. That's interesting because also Peter Levine is using somatic experiencing in his therapy in order to help people with, for example, post-traumatic stress, and it's a modality that actually has gotten quite a lot of attention lately, and also scientific articles. I see. Well, when I wrote this article on reactivation, I found a lot of interesting scientific articles about how they used somatic experience to treat people with PTSD. Yeah. There was these like tsunami survivors, and they also had a lot of good. Yeah, they improved a lot after receiving somatic experiencing therapy. So I think that, for example, with IM, given that the come up is slower, you have more space or like time in that space where you experiencing the acute effects. There seems to be a window there where people could potentially also, I guess, in a therapeutic setting, stay connected with a therapist and not completely like dissociate. So they're still very much present in their body. And I think that if they're guided, then perhaps working through somatic pain, like for example, if they're encouraged to like pay attention to like, where do you feel you have some tension in your body? Is that in your back? Okay, what is there? And then diving into it, maybe there could be some like, I don't know, somatic experiencing combination with 5-MeO-DMT. It could be interesting. So I think that, of course, with the whole thing about context and how the facilitator works, their approach might have played a part in the results that we see. But since we're not aware of like who were the facilitators, where did this happen, we can't really say for sure. Mm-hmm. But we know that context plays a role, and definitely a sense of safety and how you do things. So I can just speculate that this might have been the case.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about some of the somatic effects of 5-MeO? You see some of the videos online and you see a lot of people either shaking, or it does seem like there's a very powerful somatic component with this medicine as well.
Yeah. Like I also think that many of the videos are a little bit like it's a bad representation in a way. We also see a lot of malpractice in those videos. Yep. I don't think that all of those shaking and trembling can be attributed to 5-MeO-DMT alone. But there are, of course, animal research showing that hypothermia can occur. There could be trembling and things like that. And that seems to be because of like the activation of the serotonin receptor. We know 5-MeO-DMT is very potent. And I think that it's very easy to get too much, which then could make these, I don't know, we can call them like adverse symptoms occur. So control of dose is definitely important.
Yeah. Going back to that, what you're bringing up about IM and being able to work somatically, just got me thinking about something. I think it was Kat Harrison said this in the DMT, the spirit molecule. It might have been somebody else, but I know they brought it up there. But like DMT just being like this quick, powerful cannon shot, and then you're back within like 15 minutes. You probably don't remember much, versus like ayahuasca being this more long, drawn out process where you can kind of stay in that experience and maybe do a little bit more work. Yeah. And it does seem like that could be the benefit of, maybe doing something like IM that's a little bit more extended versus like this kind of power shot cannon. But I also, also the novelty, I guess, of the quick, powerful experience might be also very appealing to people as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think 5-MeO-DMT has been talked about like, it's just this quick fix, like it's rapid, fast onset, and it's over pretty quickly too. And I think perhaps people have gotten the wrong impression that if you just use 5-MeO-DMT, that's going to fix you.
Mm-hmm.
But if it was that easy, we wouldn't have this like mental health epidemic, regardless of the COVID, I think. So yeah, I think that even though 5-MeO-DMT is short acting, giving it intramuscularly might give a person a little bit of extra time, and that can be used very easily in a therapeutic setting. And it's going to be much less costly for the person. You don't need to have like a therapist sit with you for 46 hours like you would have with psilocybin. So I think you can make it more affordable in that way. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you were to put this in like, I don't know, therapeutic way, like with psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, you would have some sessions before, and then you would have the 5-MeO-DMT session and some integration sessions. So overall, I think it would just be much more cost benefit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In your group, have you guys been like hypothesizing what 5-MeO in a clinical setting would look like? What conditions would possibly be beneficial? Depression, anxiety. And I know that's hard to speculate right now because not some of the research, but just wondering, Joe and I were talking on one of our last Friday episodes about MindMed doing DMT studies and just thinking about like the clinical application. And, we brought up, one reason I think why ketamine is really great, it's much shorter acting and you could get a session done in 2 hours possibly. I know some clinicians do 4 hours sessions, but it's much shorter than psilocybin or LSD. And I also wonder too, with some of these more potent medicines, what type of interesting transpersonal phenomenon can occur, and are we ready for that clinically for entity encounters and stuff like that? How are these medicines really going to change our view of dealing with some of these phenomenon, and are we ready to kind of handle some of the intensity that might come out of it?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I keep thinking about, for example, if you were to compare 5-MeO-DMT with DMT, like they're very similar molecularly and like they're fast acting, but one thing that they're very different on is like the experience. So I've rarely heard about people that have taken 5-MeO-DMT and had like a visual experience.
Right.
Now I've been in contact with some, let's call them scientific outliers that experienced the visuals on 5-MeO-DMT, and it was quite interesting. The person described kind of like being in this, I don't know, the person described being outside a pyramid, like an Aztec pyramid, singing with like a bunch of people. And when the person were in their experience, I was also there with them, and they were singing. So this like very old song, but the person couldn't remember anything when they woke up. But it seems like what 5-MeO-DMT does is that it kind of like evokes these intense feelings of like oneness, sacredness. And I think that the fact that it seems to amplify feelings might be very helpful for people with, like, say, PTSD, because, they are very much oftentimes very dissociated from their own bodies, and kind of helping them in a way to improve their interoception. So like experience of the body might be helpful, because I think that once you make the unconscious conscious, then you can learn from it, and there is not so much about resisting anymore. So Carl Jung says, what you resist persists. And what I think is happening, especially with PTSD, is that you're kind of just holding this ball underwater and it's not allowed to float to the surface.
Right. Yeah, interesting. Some of the people that I've chatted with about the difference, like I've heard somebody describe it as like DMT really brings you to this archetypal realm where it's more animated. You have a lot more kind of like these archetypal figures that you might be interacting with versus, the 5-MeO seems to blast you beyond that. And it kind of brings you to some sort of Godhead unitive experience and may not always be as frightening or disturbing as the DMT experience where you come back and go, what the hell just happened?
Yeah. And one thing I thought about, perhaps like the whole DMT experience can be like a little bit of entertainment in the way that you have all these visuals. So it doesn't make you contact or like experience that much connection with your body. But I don't know. I'm just speculating and like, thinking out loud.
It's fun to speculate and just toss things out there.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, it sounds like we're kind of wrapping up with this reactivation article. Do you want to move on to talk a little bit about your dissertation and what you've learned throughout your research, what you're really focusing on there? And
yeah, definitely. What did we learn from my dissertation? Well, if you read through it, like it basically contains five studies, 2 on ayahuasca and 3 on 5-MeO-DMT. And the first one on ayahuasca was basically looking at the mental health effects of use. So that first study was done in Colombia, in Netherlands. So I was traveling around and living in Colombia at the time and back in 2017, and my supervisors and my team were collecting data back home in Netherlands and outside of Maastricht. And what we learned here was that there was improvement in mental health related variables such as decrease in affect, like depression, anxiety, and stress. There was improvement in convergent thinking, which is basically about finding an optimal solution to a problem. So what I started thinking about now when I was like preparing for my defense is that we know, for example, with psychedelics that they can bring about insights. Things are becoming more conscious and you might think of things in a different way than before. And also we know that it can enhance mindfulness related capacities, especially then like awareness. And awareness is a prerequisite for convergent thinking. So thinking back, like ayahuasca increased convergent thinking. So I started thinking that when people are trying to change a habit, say a person wants to stop drinking, so they have an ayahuasca session and they realize, okay, drinking is not so good. And then their awareness capacities are enhanced, but so too their convergent thinking. And if a person is repeatedly making or making the right decision in this, like where they have to choose between alcohol or like a glass of water, if they repeatedly choose water, then ultimately that will lead to a betterment in mental health in a way,
right?
Because suddenly that will have an impact on like their sleep, inflammation in their body, well-being overall. So I think that it all just ties together. And then what we see in the second study that I did was that we did this placebo control study, also in a naturalistic setting, where some people received placebo and other people received ayahuasca. But we saw that there was a reduction in affect, depression, anxiety, and stress in both treatment groups. So that just goes to show that there is actually more about like the context really plays a role in steering this reduction, it seems. And
what type of context was that? Was that kind of in a shamanic context where there was like Icaros and, shamanic practitioners there doing all that type of work?
So this was in a so-called neo-shamanic setting. So it was in this like retreat happening in Europe, and they were, I guess, borrowing things from shamanic practices and kind of like westernizing it a little bit. And of course, it's important to highlight that we see this like blossoming of ayahuasca use in the West, and many people are borrowing practices from shamans and everything, but it's kind of like, more westernized, and oftentimes people that use them could be very much romanticizing a little bit the effects of ayahuasca and so forth. So perhaps in a way their belief in its capacity to heal them might also steer these effects.
Right.
And if you're then in this community as well, or in the group session where you have many of those people that believe like, oh, ayahuasca is the cure, obviously you're going to get impacted by that, I think.
Right. Yeah. Definitely. I'm just thinking about when I was at Soltara, they were saying like, you don't need to drink the medicine to receive healing. And I was just even thinking about the container there where you had the Shipibo healers. They were singing the whole time, and they were coming around and they would do individual songs to you, and maybe they would do some of that shamanic healing with you. And so just even thinking about that in more of those containers where it's like, maybe it is what's going on there. You don't need the medicine, right?
Yeah. Definitely. And I think you're tapping on something that is really important here. I think you might not need the medicine, but you need to feel safe. You need to perhaps experience being heard and seen. Yeah. And I think that's very much what can occur in these sessions, because psychedelics do help us remember things that we have repressed, but obviously it also makes us very vulnerable, and things might come up, and having somebody witness that and validate those feelings that are expressed and shown can be, I think, incredibly healing for people.
Again, group process and community and just being witnessed. I mean, there's a huge healing component there, I believe.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so that was like the ayahuasca side of what we learned in my thesis. And then we've tapped on one of the studies that I did with 5-MeO-DMT, like the reactivation survey. But then I also carried out like naturalistic observational research on toad secretion, where we found a similar trend of like improvement in mental health, like with ayahuasca. I didn't get to do a placebo control with 5-MeO though, but that's going to be quite a challenge, I think, because how would you find a good enough placebo for that? It's quite a tricky one, I think.
I have no idea.
Maybe just like a low dose, a very low dose, a starting dose. So I need to think more on that. But overall, I just think that what my thesis shows is that there is more to healing than just like a pharmacological intervention. So I wrap up at the end of my discussion part that we can probably learn from ayahuasca ceremonies and perhaps also other group settings in a way. Holotropic breathwork might be another one that we could look further into, because like we spoke about before, music plays a role, social dynamics. But I also think that, of course, diet plays a role. Microbiomes is an interesting thing that I really wonder why people haven't paid more attention to. And I read this study the other day before my defense, and it was about like research on the importance of microbiomes in fear extinction.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And what the researchers had done here was that they had taken like two groups of mice. So one group had grown up like completely in isolation. So they had like no microbiomes. And then the other group, I think, if I remember correctly, received treatment with antibiotics. So they had some microbiomes, but a little bit less, And then they basically kind of like induced a little bit of a trauma on them. And both groups got traumatized fairly quickly. But then when they were going to do the fear extinction, the group without microbiomes didn't improve. Like they were kind of stuck in this freeze response in a way, and they couldn't really get better. So the researchers kind of like concluded like microbiomes are important for fear extinction.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah. And that made me think about ayahuasca. There is a diet before. So maybe there's an actual reason for that. And it makes sense when I think about this study. So I'm curious if, the diet is actually just like a prep or like enhancement of the microbiome so that you can better, I don't know, unlearn or like reprogram your memories.
Right. That's really interesting. Yeah, the diet is really an interesting factor, and maybe it does have some sort of impact on the microbiome. But I also too wonder like the intention on actually cutting things out, going through. I mean, oh man, caffeine withdrawal. I started to realize, wow, I'm really addicted to caffeine after having to, and that was the one thing I had like a really hard time cutting out. I think I like cut it out like a couple days before I got down there, and I was like, oh man, I just want coffee. But just the amount of work it actually went into to prepare myself for that was a lot. And I think just cutting away from things, the emotions are already arising. Like, I did this during the holiday, and sitting down with like lightly curried lentils and sweet potatoes over rice, and my family is eating like prime rib, and I'm like, I mean, it really tested my self-discipline at times. I'm like, I just want some real food. But just sitting with all the emotion that was coming up beforehand, sitting with some of the withdrawal from sugar and coffee and stuff like that. I mean, that was a process in itself. And I think that helped to prime, you're already going, if you are following that protocol, you're already starting to be in a more vulnerable state in a sense. And so I think, there's probably a lot of different factors there with the diet, even just leading up to the experience. I found it to be really interesting just to be able to do a lot of journaling and just witness how my body was reacting and sticking with like all the emotions that were coming up. And it's the process begins before you even take the medicine.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like this is also what we see like with psychedelic assisted therapy, like there's preps before. And I think that also like makes you also more committed to the process overall. And then another thing that I remember now is that, with, for example, they say you shouldn't eat like red meat or things like that. And that is to kind of like reduce the tyramine.
Yeah, tyramine. Yep. Like aged cheeses, meats, like certain, red meat, smoked meats and stuff like that. So, because then you have, I guess, that the interaction with the monoamine oxidase inhibitor. Yes. So you could possibly experience a little bit of like elevated heart rate or blood pressure. Or you could get headaches if you have too much tyramine in your system.
Yeah. Yeah, because the MAOIs would kind of like stop this process of, I guess, how would you say it? Like it wouldn't break down the tyramine, so you would have elevated levels essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that increases blood pressure, and then that could just be very problematic and very uncomfortable. So it makes sense.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about. So thinking about, you're even just talking about healing. And I wonder, after doing some of this research and you're looking at some of these other factors at play, and, we always think like psychedelics is healing us. And I wonder, this is something I've been thinking about for the past few years, being on a healing journey. Like, what is healing?
Yeah.
What does healing mean? What does it mean to heal?
Yeah, I think what I also heard it so many times, like in the underground, whenever I came to these sessions, like, oh, I want to heal myself. And what does that mean? But I guess like in therapy, it's about getting back to a baseline where you're not really plagued with all these like symptoms of affect and somatization, whatever it is, and kind of get to like a level where you can actually function and where things aren't really getting in the way of your life to a big extent. And I think that, it's all about balance, because life isn't amazing all the time. It's going to be rough. There's going to be some bumps that people have to get over. And I think there's this poem by Rumi kind of talking about that you should let this guest come into your house and just like sit with it and all of this. I have to find that one afterwards.
The Guest House. It's a wonderful poem.
Yeah, the Guest House. Yeah. So I think that what we can learn is that to learn to sit with difficult emotions and not push them aside, because what I've learned, and you'll see it in my thesis in the afterwards section, like it's clear that I've had my own struggles that I try to find kind of like how would you say, like a way out of. And I learned that there is comfort in the discomfort.
Yeah.
And I learned that you can basically figure out so many things about yourself if you just sit with yourself for a moment and you stay in that uncomfortable silence and realize, okay, that's why I have this feeling right now. And it's because this and this, and what can I learn from this? Mm-hmm. I think that introspection and sitting with difficult emotions can be extremely helpful.
Yeah. I always come back to like the analogy of alchemy, how to like sit in the fire and let things transmute and change. There's, I think, something to that of sitting in the fire and letting the changes occur. It's not easy, really painful at times, right? Yeah. But I think that's something that psychedelics teach us, right? It's like when, that quote unquote bad trip comes up, right? A difficult emotion, difficult experience, difficult thought patterns are arising. Yeah. And how do we sit with that and observe it and be like, okay, maybe I can make a change here. Oh, I'm finally aware that this thing is here. Or, wow, I've been neglecting this, and now this is really terrifying to confront, but I have to sit with it, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think there's a level of alchemy there too. It's just like letting it transmute and change form and
definitely. So yeah, I think that's one thing that psychedelics can help us do. It can help us in that process of facing things that aren't that easy to face, because we know that it has also a certain effect on our brain, like reducing our fear response. So it can make things easier. And then especially for people that are very much struggling with mental problems stemming from like trauma or depression or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is your dissertation available online if people wanted to check it out?
Yeah, I put it actually out on Amazon.
Sweet.
If people want to get it. Yeah, so it's
we'll
out
drop
there.
a link. I actually just ordered it last night. So
yay! Oh, cool. Yeah, because we were only able to print 40 copies for my defense. So the version online doesn't look like this one. This is like the 40 special edition. But I wanted to make it publicly available for people so that anyone who wants to read can get an access and see what I learned. So there's all my studies and also like an afterwards section where I'm talking a little bit about what I've learned. So yeah.
Sweet. We're over an hour, but there was something that you touched on before we got recording and just thinking about what you've learned. And is there any advice, anything that you want to, tell people that are listening that might be graduate students or they're psychedelic researchers? Like, what have you learned this process of researching psychedelics? And are there any tips or pieces of guidance to let other people know about?
Oh, yeah, it's a great question. And I think that I learned so much more about 5-MeO-DMT, but I mean, there wasn't much information out about 5-MeO-DMT to begin with. So I just felt that I was able to learn more about the substance, how it works, and how it could be used going forward in a therapeutic way. I've learned that there is a lot more than just pharmacological intervention for mental health disorders. I also see the importance of the context and sense of safety. I've learned that it's important to be cautious when you're going to have these experiences, and be careful with who you have such an experience with. I learned a lot about malpractice in the underground, which I think is an important thing to be aware of, also for people's safety, but also I think things can easily get a little bit out of hand, and you can have these like cult-like formations that I think is important to be aware of, in addition to spiritual bypassing. And other than that, I also learned a lot about myself, which I also think is it's been a super important thing that I can take with me going forward in life, and also as a researcher. And I also got to know so many amazing people, including you and Joe, and that's been helpful. And I think all of it just now brought me to a place where things are starting to come together with where to take 5-MeO-DMT in the future. And I think one thing that I would say to anyone who would like to embark on, I don't know, a similar journey of becoming like a psychedelic researcher is to, of course, be passionate, driven, and all of this, but never give up. Keep on going, even when the going gets tough. And perhaps when you tried it one way, it didn't work out, then just find a different way. Because that's one thing I learned for sure, that there is always a way, you just need to find it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for that. I'm sure that's helpful for some of the people listening that are embarking. I mean, this is kind of like it's starting to become a little bit more accepted, right? But it still probably feels like a lonely path for a lot of folks. Where do you find mentors for this stuff? If you are taking the university route, how do you find, there's probably only a handful. I mean, it probably seems like much bigger for us that know a lot of people are like, oh, there's people all over the place. But, how many people are at universities where there aren't mentors that are interested in this stuff, and you have to, really kind of forge your own path and trying to research this at times. And so I could imagine it also might have felt lonely or just like really difficult.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty true. And I did at sometimes actually feel pretty lonely and like questioning myself, like, am I doing a good enough job? Should I be doing this? I think the experience of imposter syndrome just became like really big at some points. And even though I had those thoughts or feelings, I think that, again, community played in, and that kind of like gave me this boost to continue. And I also, learned to be a little bit like nice to myself, a little bit strict, like, it's okay you feel like this, but we can do it.
Yeah. Positive self-talk.
Yes. Yeah. At times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now that you've completed, any future plans in the psychedelic world? What are your plans post-graduation?
So I've been working at Imperial since December 2019.
Awesome.
And so I started there as an RA research assistant, and been trying to carry out some more 5-MeO-DMT related research. And also, now I'll be a postdoc, so I'll work there with Robin and Chris. So I'm excited.
That's amazing. That's a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, no, I'm very thankful to have the opportunity to work with these amazing people. And Chris did such an amazing job with DMT research, and I would love to do something similar with 5-MeO. And Robin is, of course, an amazing person to learn from. And of course, there are many other individuals like David Rizzo, Carl H. Smith, who's not directly at Imperial, but working a little bit with us on some projects. And there's Jack Alaka. Have you heard of him?
No, I don't think so.
He's
Maybe
in Melbourne, or he did his PhD in Melbourne. He's a special creature, to put it mildly. And Lisa Lawn as well. She's amazing. So I think I'm going to have a great time there. working with these guys. And
yeah, that's an amazing opportunity. Congrats.
Thank you. So, yeah.
It's going to be awesome to watch you grow and see what you do for this space and see what you have to contribute. I'm excited.
Thank you. I think another, just to shoot it in here, like another advice for a person is to go the multidisciplinary route. Because I think that there's so many components to the effects of psychedelics, and doing it in like a way with many different people from different disciplines can have a very, I think that could be a good thing because you get so many different angles covered. So.
And this is such a multidisciplinary field. And that's what I've learned by doing this podcast. I mean, just the range of conversations I've had. I mean, I remember just talking to some guy about Quetzalcoatl and mushrooms, and I'm like, I know nothing about like Mayan and Aztec mythology, and there's so much to learn from the folklore, anthropological point of view to the hardcore neuroscience, psychotherapy. I mean, it's a lot of stuff to take into consideration with psychedelics, that's for sure.
I think we need like a, we call it multidisciplinary, but I think it's also like a holistic research approach. Yeah, maybe that could be the new way of doing psychedelic research. And
I think maybe some of your research points that out when you're looking at like the context of like the ceremony and like what are all the variables that are going in here. We're looking at like maybe the psychology aspect, the shamanic aspect, and just all these different variables that are playing a role into healing. And it's not just so one avenue, like this is the one way to do it. There's a lot of factors here.
Absolutely. So it's definitely something to keep in mind for anybody else who wants to do more research and, who might already be doing research.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, any closing thoughts? And I don't know if you have an online presence or a website that you want to point people in the direction of, but final thoughts, and where can people find you if you have anything online?
Yeah, I don't have anything online at the moment. I think we're planning on making something online, but right now I don't have anything. So I guess my email would be where people could reach me. And I think you could find that on Imperial's website.
Awesome. And then definitely check out Malin's dissertation. We'll put the link in the show notes so people can grab that if they're interested.
Wonderful.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's always wonderful catching up with you, and always glad to check in and see what you're up to. So thanks so much for your time, Malin.
Thank you so much for having me again.
All right, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that episode with Dr. Malin Uthaug. I know I enjoyed it and learned lots, and just really great to catch up with her and really learn more about what her dissertation was about and some of the updates on 5-MeO and her research around ayahuasca. So I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something new. And if you have any questions, comments, anything like that, feel free to email us. psychedelicstodayemail@gmail.com. Again, be sure to subscribe to our podcast, Psychedelics Today, on Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to those podcasts. And be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook. And I think that's it for now. Signing off. I hope everybody has a wonderful week. Hope everybody's staying well, staying grounded through these crazy times. But I feel like psychedelic community knows something, at least something about navigating difficulty and navigating uncertainty and chaos. So I hope you're taking care of yourselves out there. Hope you're practicing some self-care and creating space, and also marching forward and also trying to create some change in the world as things emerge, and to get involved in different things. The world needs healing, and a lot of stuff is coming up. So I hope you're also getting out there, taking some action, and getting involved somehow, and really speaking up about things that don't feel right. So signing off for the week. I hope everybody has a wonderful week, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Psychedelics Today. Thank you.